Have you ever walked into a room and felt your soul sigh, not in relief but in burden, as if the very presence of someone silently drained your energy, like a whisper of unrest curling around your spirit? You smile, you nod, you talk, but deep inside you feel something sacred unraveling. And you can't quite name it. You can't explain why your sleep is restless, why your joy seems muffled, or why your thoughts feel like waves crashing without rhythm. But deep in the corners of your soul, you sense it clearly. You are not at peace. And here's the part we often avoid. There is a face behind your turmoil, a person, one whose words, actions, or even mere existence in your life is the thread pulling apart your inner calm. We are taught to endure, to forgive, to turn the other cheek, but nowhere does it say we must let ourselves bleed on the inside while keeping company with those who harm us quietly. Peace does not vanish on its own. It is stolen, chipped away, and suffocated, often by someone we have allowed too close. Not every enemy arrives with weapons. Some come with charm, proximity, and entitlement. They speak love but sow doubt. They offer advice but breed confusion. They walk beside you, yet your spirit limps in their shadow. And still we justify their place in our life, as if kindness demands our destruction. But hear this clearly. God never asked you to sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort. If someone costs you your serenity, it is not noble to stay. It is reckless. There comes a time when the soul must rise and ask, what would I become if I no longer had to manage this chaos? Because peace is not just a feeling. It is a place where you meet yourself, meet your Creator, and hear your purpose again. And if someone keeps dragging you out of that place, then they are not a companion, they are a thief. So let us walk gently but firmly into truth. Let us uncover the signs that someone is the reason you are losing your peace, and what you must do now. There is a certain kind of unease that does not shout, it whispers. It creeps in quietly when someone enters the room and begins to settle like a fog around your chest. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, but it's there. A subtle tightening in your spirit, a stiffness in your shoulders. You find yourself scanning the atmosphere for potential tension, preparing your words in advance, not to express yourself honestly, but to avoid setting off a spark that could ignite into emotional chaos. And what's most tragic? You've become so used to it, you almost believe it's normal. This person, the one you perhaps love, respect, or feel obligated to tolerate, has become a source of invisible noise in your life. Their presence doesn't bring calm. It doesn't bring safety. It doesn't bring rest. Instead, it brings the kind of discomfort that drains you quietly, so softly you often don't realize how deeply it has rooted into your nervous system. You smile through conversations while your thoughts tremble inside. You nod along with their stories while your own voice disappears into the background. Your heart races, not because of excitement, but out of defense. You are bracing yourself every time they walk in. This is not peace. This is anxiety wearing a mask of politeness. You may try to rationalize it. They mean well. They've had a hard life. I'm just being too sensitive. But peace doesn't need excuses. And your body, the sacred temple of your soul, cannot be deceived. It knows when it's in danger, even if that danger wears the skin of someone you know. And if you consistently find yourself more exhausted after being with them, if your chest tightens and your breathing shallows, your soul is not overreacting. It is trying to protect itself. Peace, true peace, comes with softness. It's like a gentle wind that lets you breathe deeper. You don't have to perform around peaceful people. You don't have to guess their mood before opening your mouth. You don't have to constantly read between the lines to find the threat hidden in their compliments. Peace brings rest to your bones and clarity to your mind. But when someone's presence feels like a silent war zone, your spirit will constantly be in fight or flight. And how long can you live in such a state before your joy begins to die? It is not unloving to recognize that someone's energy is disrupting your inner world. In fact, it is one of the most sacred forms of self-respect. Your mind is not a battlefield. Your heart is not a punching bag. Your peace is not a luxury. It is your God-given right. And yet, you keep allowing this person to occupy space in your life, not because they bring healing, but because you feel guilty for pulling away. But ask yourself, why should I feel guilty for protecting my peace? Who taught me that love means tolerating harm? Who convinced me that in order to be a good person, I must keep inviting anxiety into my life and calling it compassion? There are people whose very presence helps you breathe more deeply. They don't need to say anything profound. Just sitting beside them makes you feel safe. And then there are people who, despite all your efforts to keep harmony, seem to radiate unrest. They may never shout, they may never curse, but they walk with the subtle poison of control, judgment, and emotional instability. Don't confuse the absence of violence with the presence of peace. Don't confuse familiar pain with healthy connection. Don't confuse the fear of letting someone down with the calling to protect your soul. You are not created to live in anxiety, and no one, no matter how close, has the right to rob you of the stillness your heart was designed to hold. There's a dangerous pattern that often goes unnoticed until the soul becomes weary. It's when someone disguises their control as love and manipulates your kindness to keep you tethered to their dysfunction. They know you're compassionate. They know you feel deeply. They know your heart bends easily in the direction of mercy. And so they twist that very tenderness into a tool they can use to mold your behavior and manage your response. What they cannot achieve through honesty, they will extract through guilt. At first, it's subtle. They make small comments that question your loyalty when you create boundaries. They hint that you're changing, becoming distant or ungrateful whenever you begin to protect your peace. They don't demand things openly. They nudge you emotionally, making you feel like pulling away is a betrayal. Suddenly, your acts of kindness are no longer choices. They are obligations. You stop doing things from the overflow of love and start doing them out of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of disappointing them, fear of being labeled as selfish. This is not peace. This is manipulation wrapped in affection. And they might say, "I thought you cared," when you finally say no. Or, "After all I've done for you," when you try to establish a boundary. But real love doesn't keep score. Real love doesn't make you pay for freedom with guilt. Real love doesn't put chains on your soul and call it emotional debt. If someone makes you feel like love must always come with a sacrifice of self-respect, that's not love, it's control. And the tragedy is that they've learnt to do it with a soft voice, a caring tone, and an innocent expression, making it all the harder for you to call it what it is. They've studied your kindness. They know exactly which words pierce your heart. They know how much you value relationships, and they use that knowledge not to nurture the bond, but to trap you in it. You find yourself over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-compensating. And still, it's never enough. Because when someone uses manipulation as their language, no amount of genuine love will satisfy them. Their aim isn't mutual care, it's quiet dominance. They want to shape your reality, define your reactions, and corner your heart so you keep returning to them, not out of desire, but out of emotional fear. You may have told yourself, "They don't mean to hurt me, they just love differently." But deep down you know that love isn't supposed to feel like this. It isn't supposed to feel like walking through a field of emotional landmines, tiptoeing every step to avoid another explosion. It isn't supposed to make you doubt yourself constantly, second-guess your intentions, and question your worth when you finally choose to say no. Think about it. How often have you bent over backwards to make them happy, only to feel depleted and unseen afterward? How many times have you sacrificed your peace just to keep them calm, only to be blamed again for not doing enough? If they loved your heart, they would never use it against you. But when someone sees your kindness as a weakness instead of a strength, they will push you just far enough to keep control, but never far enough to lose access to your loyalty. This isn't love, it's manipulation posing as connection, and every time you yield to their tactics, you lose a piece of yourself. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to think that endurance is virtue, and that boundaries are cruelty. But you are allowed to stop dancing for their approval. You are allowed to stop offering your soul as a sacrifice for someone else's emotional comfort. The God who made you didn't design you to be anyone's puppet. He designed you to be free. And anyone who makes you feel that your love must be earned through pain is not honoring your soul. They are trying to own it. There's a silent war many people fight every day, one where they slowly erase parts of themselves to keep someone else from erupting. You laugh softer, speak less, think twice before sharing your joy or opinions, not because you want to, but because you've learned that any trace of authenticity can trigger discomfort in the other person. So you shrink, you censor your voice, you water down your light, and you call it maturity. You tell yourself it's wisdom, that you're just avoiding unnecessary conflict. But the truth, you're not keeping the peace. You're living in fear, dressing it up as diplomacy. You start to lose track of how many times you've stayed silent when you should have spoken, how many times you've swallowed your feelings to prevent their moods from shifting. You memorize their emotional climate and start adjusting your behavior like the weather. You become so adept at anticipating their reactions that you begin to forget what your own reactions used to be. Who you were before you learnt to bend becomes a faded memory, and you mourn your own disappearance, quietly. This is what it looks like when you diminish yourself for the sake of peace. But let's be honest, that isn't peace. That's submission to emotional volatility. That's the body and soul taking on the shape of someone else's insecurities, just to keep the relationship from falling apart. And the saddest part is how normal it begins to feel, how easy it is to justify this slow erosion of self. You think you're being the bigger person, you think you're just choosing your battles, but somewhere in the compromise you've given up the war for your own freedom. You weren't created to be small. You weren't designed to filter every word, every gesture, every expression just to ensure someone else's comfort. And yet, here you are, dimming your sparkle so they don't feel threatened, hiding your joy so they don't feel insecure, holding your wisdom so they don't feel inferior. You trade your peace for their ease. And in doing so, your soul pays the price. Healthy love does not require suppression. Real connection makes room for your voice, your growth, your light. But if someone requires you to compress who you are just to maintain harmony, it's not harmony, it's quiet control. And the more you shrink to fit inside their fragile perception of you, the more you begin to suffocate in the mold they've created. What makes this even more complex is the emotional weight they place on you when you even think about standing tall. The subtle shame, the passive comments, the sudden distance. They use these tactics to remind you that your fullness is too much, that your authenticity causes disruption. And because you're kind, because you're empathetic, you step back. You reduce yourself. Not out of weakness, but out of a desire to keep things from breaking. But things are breaking inside of you. You were not called to be less so someone else can feel more. You were not designed to be silent so someone else can speak over you. You were not meant to trade your peace just to keep the room from shaking. There is a sacred cost to diminishing yourself, and it shows up in the form of chronic exhaustion, unexplained sadness, and a quiet longing to be seen again, not by the world, but by yourself. Every time you make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort, you are teaching your soul that it is not safe to be fully alive. But the truth is, the world doesn't need more polite pretenders. It needs bold truth-bearers. And you, your voice, your energy, your presence are not a disruption. You are a revelation. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise does not deserve the privilege of your nearness. There's a kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep can fix. It doesn't come from physical labor or long hours at work. It comes from people, specific people who drain your spirit with their presence. These are the ones you interact with and afterward feel like you've carried emotional boulders across a desert. Your body might be still, but your soul feels worn down, and you can't always explain why. All you know is that every conversation, every moment spent with them leaves you emptier than before. At first you might overlook it. You chalk it up to a long day or your own sensitivity. But then the pattern repeats. You could have started the day with clarity and strength, but a single interaction with them leaves you mentally foggy, emotionally scattered, and spiritually fatigued. It's not what they said, it's what you felt. And that feeling lingers, like a shadow that follows you even after they're gone. This is the cost of remaining connected to someone who operates in chaos. You absorb it. They offload their dysfunction onto you through every sigh, every jab, every silence that screams louder than words. And because you are kind, you listen. Because you are empathetic, you try to understand. But little by little, their burdens become your weight. Their confusion becomes your mental clutter. Their unrest becomes your lack of peace. And you begin to wonder, why am I always so tired after being around them? Why does my motivation disappear? Why do I feel like I have to recover after every interaction? The answer isn't always obvious, because the damage isn't always loud. Toxic energy doesn't need raised voices or insults. Sometimes it's in the passive aggression, the veiled criticism, the constant complaining, or the way they somehow make everything about them. You sit with them, but it's not a conversation. It's an emotional transaction. They speak, and you lose a piece of yourself. Your spirit was never designed to carry the weight of someone else's chaos indefinitely. You are not their therapist, their savior, or their emotional landfill. But when someone constantly brings negativity into your space, it will bleed into your thoughts, your mood, and eventually your purpose. What starts as compassion can quietly become codependency. And before you know it, you're exhausted not because you did something wrong, but because you kept showing up for someone who refuses to grow. The soul is wise. It recognizes imbalance before the mind does. It signals fatigue, not just because of exertion, but because of misalignment. If someone makes you feel like you're constantly walking uphill just to connect, that is not peace, it is resistance, and resistance is exhausting. You may think, if I just try harder, maybe they'll change, but that thought is another anchor. You're not tired from trying, you're tired from trying alone. Pay attention to how you feel after being around certain people. If your light dims, if your thoughts spiral, if your heart feels heavy, your spirit is trying to speak. The exhaustion you feel is not random, it's a signal, a spiritual alert that something or someone is not right for your soul. And if you ignore that signal long enough, you'll begin to forget what peace even feels like. You'll start living from a place of survival, calling it enjoyment. But you were not created to merely endure people. You were created to thrive in relationships that honor your presence, restore your spirit, and bring rest to your soul. The ones who truly belong in your life will leave you feeling fuller, not emptier. They'll pour back into you, not drink from your well until it's dry. Exhaustion is not your normal. It's a red flag. Listen to it. Your peace depends on it. There is a distinct kind of emotional damage that comes not from the initial act of harm, but from the aftermath. The denial, the deflection, the refusal to take responsibility. Some people don't just cause disturbance, they pretend it never happened. And in doing so, they force you to carry not only the pain, but also the weight of pretending everything is okay. It's a double burden. First the wound, then the silence. You try to bring up how their actions made you feel, but suddenly you're the problem. They twist your concern into accusations. You mention their harsh words or cold attitude, and they accuse you of being too sensitive, too dramatic, or even ungrateful. What you lived through, they'll frame as an illusion. What hurt you deeply, they'll treat as insignificant. And that dismissal, that cold refusal to validate your pain, is not just avoidance. It's a form of emotional gaslighting. They leave emotional chaos in their wake, but act like nothing happened. They make passive-aggressive remarks, but if you respond, they say, "I was just joking." They raise their voice, then act surprised when you say they were angry. They ignore you for days and expect you to move on like nothing happened. You keep waiting for them to own it, to say, "Yes, I did that, and I see how it hurt you," but that moment never comes, because for them, admitting fault feels like losing control. So instead they blame, deflect, minimize, or avoid. But the cost of their denial isn't just theirs, it's yours. You begin to doubt your memory. You start editing your emotions to match their version of the truth. You question whether you're overreacting or imagining things. Slowly, your trust in yourself erodes. You lose the confidence to stand by your experience, and perhaps most tragically, you begin to believe that your feelings are a problem that must be fixed, rather than a signal that something is deeply wrong. It is impossible to maintain peace with someone who refuses to take ownership of their impact. True reconciliation requires recognition. Healing requires responsibility. But if they constantly dodge accountability, they are not seeking restoration. They are seeking control, and control often wears the disguise of confusion. "That's not what I meant. You took it the wrong way. You're always making me the bad guy." You see, they don't want to solve the problem. They want to erase the evidence. When someone refuses to acknowledge their role in your pain, they are choosing their comfort over your healing. They want to move forward without cleaning the mess they left behind. But peace can't grow in denial. It can't survive in relationships where you're asked to pretend everything is fine when your soul knows otherwise. And you've likely tried to explain, tried to forgive without an apology, tried to let things go. But letting go becomes difficult when the wound is still open, and the one who caused it acts like it doesn't exist. You're not holding on out of bitterness. You're holding on because no one ever gave the pain a name, and naming it is the first step to releasing it. You deserve relationships where accountability is not feared but welcomed, where someone can say, "I was wrong," not as a weakness but as a strength, where your feelings are not negotiated but honored. Peace does not demand perfection, but it does require truth, and truth can't breathe in a space where someone refuses to see the damage they've done. If they cannot say, "I hurt you," they do not deserve to stay close to your heart, because real love doesn't erase your pain, it validates it, owns it, and works to never cause it again. There are people whose absence brings more clarity than their presence ever did. You don't always notice it right away, but the signs begin to emerge when they're not around. You think more clearly, breathe more deeply, and pray with less noise in your heart. The confusion that once clouded your spirit starts to lift. The pressure that used to weigh heavy on your chest eases. And most telling of all, your connection with God begins to feel natural again. Not forced, not distracted, just sacred and still. When someone disrupts your spiritual alignment, it's rarely because they speak against your faith. It's usually far subtler than that. They might talk about God with you. They may even say they support your beliefs, but their energy, their influence, their emotional weight pulls you away from divine clarity. Your prayer life feels blocked. Your sense of peace is constantly under siege. You struggle to hear God, not because he has gone silent, but because someone else's presence has turned up the volume of chaos inside you. You may not have realized how much spiritual noise they created until they were gone. And that silence, that divine quiet, isn't loneliness. It's alignment. It's God reclaiming the space in your heart that was being crowded by emotional confusion, manipulation, or pain. Sometimes the distance from someone isn't a loss, it's a return to God, to clarity, to self. Their absence doesn't hurt, it heals, and that alone tells you everything you need to know. Think about how you feel after speaking with them versus how you feel after praying. One leaves you drained, questioning yourself, feeling guilty or small. The other restores your courage, affirms your identity, and reminds you that you're loved without conditions. That contrast is no coincidence. God never leads you into relationships that require you to compromise your spiritual clarity. If someone's presence in your life consistently pulls you away from stillness, from truth, from grace, they are not aligned with the path God is calling you to walk. Some people act like a wall between you and heaven. They may not know it, and they may not intend it, but their spirit is not settled, and so it unsettles yours. Their values, their actions, even their emotional unpredictability can create spiritual static. You feel like you're constantly fighting just to stay centered. You leave conversations more anxious, your mind filled with clutter, your heart weighed down by confusion. And when you finally step away, the difference is undeniable. You feel light again. You feel closer to God again. You feel like you again. It's in their absence that your soul begins to heal. Your thoughts return to truth. Your prayers grow deeper. Your discernment sharpens. And what felt heavy and complicated suddenly feels clear and sacred. That's not coincidence. That's divine confirmation. God speaks most clearly in peace. And when someone's removal restores your peace, it means their presence was interfering with God's voice in your life. You may have asked God for guidance, for clarity, for a sign, and then came the distance. Then came the silence. Then came the strange relief you weren't expecting. Do not dismiss that as a fluke. When God wants to show you who belongs in your life, he sometimes starts by showing you who doesn't. This isn't about hating someone or condemning them. It's about acknowledging the spiritual impact of who we allow close. Some people are loud in their demands but silent in their support. Some pull us into cycles that distract us from growth, from purpose, from intimacy with God. And it's not your job to fix them, absorb them, or carry them. When someone consistently pulls you away from your peace, your center, your connection with God, that's not love. That's interference. And your spirit already knows the truth. You feel closest to heaven when they are farthest from you. That is not something to ignore. That is something to obey. There's a gentle whisper that often lives inside your spirit, faint but persistent. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It simply nudges. over and over. It shows up in your uneasiness, your fatigue, your growing discomfort. It appears in the recurring thoughts you can't shake, in the sermons you stumble upon that speak directly to your situation, in the still moments when your heart sighs with longing for peace. And even though you try to ignore it, the message keeps rising like a tide. Let go. But letting go isn't easy when your heart is entangled, especially when the person you're being called to release is someone close. You replay the memories. You hold on to the potential. You remind yourself of their pain, their story, their intentions. You tell yourself that walking away would make you selfish, unkind, or even disloyal. And so you resist. You stay. You keep trying, keep adjusting, keep hoping that maybe one day the relationship will stop draining you and start healing, but that day never comes. The truth is, God doesn't always yank things out of our lives. He's not a God of chaos. He's a God of clarity. So instead of breaking everything suddenly, he starts by revealing the truth gently. He shows you what the relationship is costing your peace. He opens your eyes to the emotional patterns that keep repeating. He allows moments of disconnection, moments of exhaustion, moments of exhaustion, moments of undeniable silence, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He lets you feel the full weight of what you've been carrying so you can finally see that it was never yours to carry in the first place. He allows the burden to grow heavier, not because he's distant, but because he wants you to recognize how far you've drifted from your own well-being. And every time you ignore that nudge, the discomfort grows stronger. It's not cruelty, it's mercy in disguise. It's God giving you another chance to obey what your spirit already knows. You see, holding on to something God is trying to remove doesn't preserve it, it poisons you. And deep down, you know this. You feel it in the way your joy has dimmed, your spirit has sagged, your prayers have felt stuck. You've been pouring into something that keeps leaving you empty. And God, in his perfect love, is not blind to your pain. He sees every tear you've cried in silence, every time you've lowered your voice to avoid conflict, every time you've bent your heart, trying to keep the connection alive. But he is also a God of timing, and there comes a moment where grace stops holding the door open and begins to close it gently but firmly. That moment is when he says, "It's time." Time to release what is breaking you. Time to choose obedience over comfort. Time to believe that peace is not found in clinging, but in surrender. Letting go is not failure. It is not betrayal. It is not weakness. Letting go is faith in action. It is the courage to believe that when God asks you to release something, it's not because he wants to take something from you, but because he wants to make room for something better, something whole, something that brings peace instead of pain, clarity instead of confusion, rest instead of resistance. You have waited long enough. You have endured more than enough. The signs have been clear, the nudges have been steady, and now your soul is ready. Ready to walk away from the noise, ready to reclaim your peace, ready to trust God fully. Because when you finally let go of what he never meant for you to carry, you will find that he was never trying to punish you, he was always trying to protect you.